Chapter 1. The night my family tried to push my 17-year-old daughter into an overflow room at their own charity gala, they had no idea I was the one who could shut the entire event down. I'm Claire Davenport, the daughter they stopped consulting, the single mother they quietly underestimated, and the managing member who owned 32% of the ballroom they were standing in. When the guest list excluded my child and the insurance writer failed compliance, the property manager didn't ask my father for approval, he asked me. And in that moment, in a room full of donors and cameras, I realized something. They didn't ignore me because I was powerless. They ignored me because they assumed I would stay quiet. They were wrong. I found out about the gala the same way I find out about most things in my family now, by accident. The email came through at 7:42 on a Tuesday morning while I was standing at my kitchen counter in Savannah waiting for the coffee to finish brewing. The subject line read, Davenport Foundation Spring Benefit 2024. It was addressed to my sister, to my father, to 3 board members, and my name sat quietly in the carbon copy line as if I were a vendor who needed to be kept in the loop. No one had called me. No one had mentioned it the Sunday before, when we all sat around my father's dining table talking about property taxes and zoning changes. I opened the attachment and scanned the invitation draft. The Davenport Foundation Spring Benefit, black tie, the River Exchange Ballroom, Saturday, April 20th. I scrolled to the guest list. My name was there. My daughter's was not. At first I assumed it was an oversight. Lila is 17. She has grown up attending these events, learning how to balance a dessert plate in one hand and shake hands with the other. I refreshed the document. I checked the second page. I even searched her name just in case it had been formatted differently. Nothing. The coffee maker beeped behind me. I did not move. I forwarded the email to Lila without thinking. Then I stopped myself and deleted it. There are certain small humiliations a mother should filter. When she came downstairs 10 minutes later in her oversized sweatshirt and bare feet, I was still standing in the same place. "Mom, you look like someone just told you the IRS is auditing us," she said, smiling. I forced a small laugh. "I just got an email about the foundation gala." "Oh." She poured herself a glass of orange juice. "Are we going?" I hesitated. "We are. You might not be." She froze for half a second. Then she nodded once like she had been expecting it. "That's okay. I didn't think I would be included this year anyway." That was the part that knocked the air out of me. Not anger, not confusion. Acceptance. "What do you mean you didn't think you'd be included?" She shrugged. "It's mostly donors and board people. Aunt Meredith probably needs the seats." Her tone was light, almost practical. She was not upset. She was prepared. And that scared me more than if she had cried. I called my sister right then. It rang 3 times before she answered. "Hey, Claire," she said, already distracted. "I'm in between calls." I kept my voice steady. "I just saw the gala email. I noticed Lila isn't on the guest list." There was a pause, not long enough to be dramatic, just long enough to be calculated. "Yeah, so, about that. The guest list is limited this year. We had to prioritize major donors and their families." "Lila is family," I said. "Of course she is." Meredith's tone shifted into something softer, the voice she uses when she thinks she is being reasonable. But the board wanted to keep it tight. "It's complicated. Complicated is a word my family uses when they mean final." "No one asked me," I said. "Claire, please. Don't make this a thing. It's one night. She's still a kid. She's 17. Exactly. She'll have plenty of years ahead of her." The conversation ended the way they always do, with me being the one who is too intense for noticing what everyone else prefers not to acknowledge. By Saturday evening, the River Exchange Ballroom looked like something out of a magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers reflected off the polished wood floors. The Savannah River moved quietly outside the tall windows, black and glossy under the city lights. The Davenport Foundation logo sat on a white backdrop near the entrance, ready for photographs. My father stood a few feet away in a tailored navy tuxedo, shaking hands with a councilman. Harold Davenport is 71 years old and has spent most of his life building Davenport Holdings into one of the most respected real estate firms along the Georgia coast. Since 1990, he has been careful about two things: property lines and reputation. My sister Meredith, 46, floated through the room in a silver gown, introducing donors to one another like she was conducting an orchestra. She has always been the face of the family, polished, approachable, safe. Lila and I arrived together. At the registration table, a young woman in a black blazer smiled brightly. "Last name." "Davenport," I said. She scanned the list, found my name, and handed me a card. Then she paused. "And your guest?" Lila stepped forward. "Lila Davenport." The woman scanned again. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm so sorry. I don't see that name on the list for the main floor. There's a general reception area upstairs for overflow guests." Overflow. It landed harder than I expected. "That's fine," Lila said quickly. "I can just hang out upstairs." Hang out? As if this were a school dance and she had come alone. I could feel eyes on us, not in a dramatic way, just the subtle shift in attention that happens when something does not line up. I took the card from the young woman and nodded. "Thank you." We stepped aside. Lila squeezed my hand once and then let go. "Really, Mom, it's okay." I looked at her and saw the practiced calm in her expression. The same calm I have worn in rooms where my voice was tolerated but not invited. Across the ballroom, my father laughed at something someone said. Meredith leaned in close to a donor's wife, her hand resting lightly on the woman's arm. Legacy. Standing in the community. Those are the phrases they use, as if dignity were something you could frame and hang in a hallway. I pulled out my phone. Daniel Harper answered on the second ring. "Claire," he said. "Everything all right?" Daniel is 53 and has managed the River Exchange property since Magnolia Harbor Partners acquired it 4 years ago. "Quick question," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Did the event planner finalize the amended liability rider for tonight?" There was a pause as he checked. "We had a last-minute issue with headcount. They're over the contracted capacity by about 30 guests. I was going to bring it to your attention after the first round of speeches." I glanced around the room. 235 guests were on the original contract. I could count more than that without trying. "Do they have the updated certificate of insurance?" I asked. "Not yet. We need managing member approval to push the amendment through." "That's you." I let that sit for a second. "Okay. I'm on site. Come find me in 10 minutes. When I hung up, Lila was watching me. "Who was that?" "Just someone from work," I said. That was not entirely untrue. 4 years ago, in 2020, Magnolia Harbor Partners purchased this building as part of a broader investment strategy. In 2021, I bought into the partnership and became a managing member with a 32% stake. My role is not ceremonial. I review contracts, I sign amendments. I make sure no one treats a liability clause like a suggestion. My family does not know that. Not because I hid it behind locked doors, but because they never thought to ask what I was building while they were busy presenting their version of the future. Lila glanced toward the staircase leading to the overflow area. "Do you want me to just go upstairs for now?" I looked at her and felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not even hurt, something steadier. I have spent most of my life adjusting myself to fit into rooms that were never arranged with me in mind. I have learned how to smile through introductions that skip my accomplishments, how to nod when decisions are made around me. But watching my daughter accept a smaller space without protest felt different. I slipped my phone back into my clutch. "No," I said softly. "Let's stay right here for a minute." Across the ballroom, Daniel had just stepped through the side entrance, scanning the room, until his eyes found mine. I have grown used to my family not asking what I do, where I invest, what I sign my name to. I have grown used to being included as an afterthought, but I am no longer willing to let my daughter grow used to that. I did not walk toward my father. I did not call my sister over. I did not raise my voice. I waited. And for the first time in a long time, I was not the least powerful person in the room. Chapter 2. That feeling did not arrive overnight. It was built slowly year after year in rooms where I learned how small a person could make herself without disappearing entirely. In 2010, I was 27 and standing in my parents' living room in Raleigh, North Carolina, trying to find the right words to tell them I was pregnant. My father, Thomas Whitaker, had just come back from a meeting with a regional developer. He still had his blazer on when I said it. I'm going to have a baby. He did not raise his voice. He did not slam his hand on the table. He simply sat down and folded his hands. This complicates things, he said. My mother, Eleanor, stood near the fireplace, her expression already calculating how this would look in the community. We will handle this quietly, she said. Quietly. I was not thrown out. I was not cut off. They paid for prenatal appointments. They asked about my health. But from that moment on, I was treated less like a daughter and more like a situation that needed management. Have you spoken to him? My father asked one evening. Yes. Is he prepared to do the right thing? I do not need him to marry me, I said. He looked at me as if I had misunderstood the entire point of adulthood. This family has a reputation, Claire. It was always about the family. When my daughter was born, they were polite. My mother brought casseroles. My father opened a college savings account. They loved her in the way people love something fragile that they did not expect to be holding. But something shifted. In 2013, my younger sister Allison, who was only 2 years younger than I was, began attending strategy meetings at Whitaker Development. My father started introducing her to investors as the future of the company. I found out about one of those meetings from a photograph posted on the company website. Allison standing beside him, smiling confidently, shaking hands with a man from Atlanta. I called my father that night. I didn't know there was a board meeting this week, I said. It wasn't a board meeting, he replied. Just a small investor session. You could have mentioned it. He sighed softly. Claire, you have a lot on your plate. I didn't want to overwhelm you. I am not overwhelmed. You have a child to think about. Your priorities are different now. Different. That was the word he used when he meant diminished. In 2015, Allison appeared in the Raleigh Business Journal under the headline, Next Generation Leadership at Whitaker Development. There was a full-page photo of her in a tailored navy suit standing in front of one of our downtown properties. My phone buzzed all morning with friends sending congratulations. You must be so proud of your sister. I was, and I was not. At dinner that Sunday, I asked my mother how the article came together. Oh, the editor reached out months ago, she said casually. Your father thought it would be good visibility. Visibility for who? For the company, Claire. Don't start. Start what? You always make things heavier than they need to be, she said, placing her napkin in her lap with careful precision. I was not angry. I was confused. I kept trying to figure out when I had become the extra piece in a puzzle that I had grown up believing was partly mine. You are reading too much into this, my sister told me once when I mentioned feeling left out. It is not about you. Those 3 sentences followed me for years. You are reading too much into this. You always make things heavy. It is not about you. They were not shouted. They were delivered gently, almost kindly, which made them harder to argue with. By 2016, my daughter was 9 years old. She had inherited my dark hair and my habit of watching a room before stepping into it. That year, Whitaker Development celebrated its 25th anniversary with a private dinner at a country club outside the city. I received an invitation in the mail addressed to Claire Whitaker, +1. I assumed the +1 was my daughter. When I called to confirm, the assistant in my father's office cleared her throat. "The dinner is adults only," she said. I hung up and stared at the invitation for a long time. Lila found it on the kitchen counter. "Is that Grandpa's company thing?" "Yes." "Are we going?" I swallowed. "I am." She waited for the rest. "You are not, sweetheart. It is adults only." She nodded almost immediately. "That's fine." She said it the same way she would say she did not mind if her favorite cereal was out of stock. "You're sure?" I asked. "Yeah. I can stay with Mrs. Bennett next door. It's boring stuff anyway." Boring stuff. At the dinner, my father gave a speech about legacy. He spoke about sacrifice and resilience and how the next generation was already stepping up. He gestured toward Allison at the table beside him. I clapped. I smiled. I went home and found my daughter asleep on the couch, a movie still playing softly in the background. In that moment, I told myself I was choosing peace. I told myself I was being mature. I told myself that fighting over an invitation would only make me look unstable. I did not realize I was teaching my daughter how to lower her expectations. The pattern continued, in small ways, in ways that were easy to dismiss. A networking brunch where Allison was asked to speak, and I was asked to help with check-in. A charity golf tournament where I was thanked for attending, but not included in the group photo. Each time I felt the same tightness in my chest. Each time I reminded myself that it was easier to let it pass. One afternoon in 2018, when Lila was 11, she came home from school unusually quiet. "What happened?" I asked. "Nothing." That word again. After a few minutes, she said, "The girls are planning a trip to the mountains for spring break. I guess I wasn't really part of the plan. Did they tell you that?" "Not exactly. They just assumed I had other things going on." "Other things." I sat down across from her at the kitchen table. "Did you want to go?" She shrugged. "It's fine." "I don't want to make it weird." I felt something inside me crack, then not loudly, but enough. "Don't make it weird." That was the language of my childhood, the language of not asking for a seat at the table because it might disturb the symmetry. I looked at her and saw my own reflection 10 years earlier, smiling in rooms where I did not feel welcome, convincing myself it did not matter. I was not silent because I was weak. I was silent because I believed that if I stayed calm, if I stayed agreeable, the door would eventually open on its own. But doors do not open for people who are always willing to stand outside. Standing in that ballroom years later, watching my daughter prepare to step into an overflow space without complaint, I understood something I had not fully grasped before. I had not been protecting my family by keeping the peace. I had been protecting their comfort. And in doing so, I had been teaching my daughter how to shrink. Chapter 3. The first time I realized I needed a different kind of strength, it was not in a boardroom. It was at my kitchen table with a stack of bills and a 9-year-old asleep on the couch. In 2014, I enrolled in the evening program at Georgia State University College of Law. I was 31. I worked as a paralegal during the day at a mid-sized firm in Atlanta, drafting motions and organizing discovery for attorneys who barely remembered my name. During orientation, a man sitting next to me leaned over and asked, "You just out of undergrad?" I smiled. "No, I have a third grader at home." He blinked, unsure how to respond, and turned back to his packet. My days started at 6 in the morning. I would wake my daughter, pack her lunch, drop her at school, drive downtown work until 5:30, grab something from a vending machine, and sit in class until 9:45. Some nights I brought her with me to campus because I could not afford a sitter. She would sit in the law library with a paperback and a small bag of pretzels, her legs swinging under the heavy oak tables. One evening close to finals, I found her asleep with her head resting on a stack of my casebooks, a yellow highlighter still clutched in her hand. I brushed her hair away from her face. "I'm almost done," I whispered. She stirred. "Did you win?" "Not yet." "You will," she murmured, already drifting again. When I graduated in 2018, there was no grand announcement. My parents sent a polite card. My sister texted a thumbs-up emoji. My daughter clapped the loudest in the auditorium. After the ceremony, she hugged me so tightly I had to laugh. "You're a lawyer now," she said. "I am. Like on TV." "Not quite. Less dramatic, more paperwork," she grinned. "Still cool." I joined a commercial compliance group at a regional firm that fall. The work was steady, meticulous, and often invisible. I reviewed contracts, assessed risk exposure, negotiated indemnification clauses that no one at a cocktail party would ever find interesting. In 2019, a manufacturing client from Alabama sat across from me in a conference room and glanced at my resume before looking up. "How long have you been leading compliance reviews?" he asked. "I've been in practice a year, but I've been working in commercial law for nearly a decade," I said. He nodded slowly. "You seem young." I met his eyes. "I am capable." He chose another firm. I drove home that night with the windows down even though it was November, letting the cold air keep me awake. I was tired of being underestimated in rooms where competence should have been enough. Around that same time, I reconnected with an old colleague, Marcus Hale, who had started a small investment partnership called Harbor Ridge Capital. They focused on undervalued commercial properties along the Georgia coast. Over coffee, he asked, "You ever think about investing on your own?" "I don't have that kind of capital," I said. "You have some," he replied, "and you understand contracts better than most investors I know." It took me 6 months to decide. I reviewed every operating agreement twice. I asked questions that annoyed even Marcus. Finally, in early 2020, I transferred $75,000 into Harbor Ridge Capital as a limited partner. That number represented years of careful saving. It represented risk. In 2021, after we acquired 2 small office complexes in Savannah and a warehouse in Brunswick, Marcus approached me with something else. "We're looking at a larger asset," he said, sliding a file across the table. "The Riverfront Exchange, a renovated historic building overlooking the Savannah River, event space on the main floor, offices above." "It's undervalued because the prior owner mismanaged bookings," Marcus explained. "We can fix that. I studied the financials, the occupancy projections, the insurance coverage." "I want a managing member role," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "That comes with responsibility." "I know." By the end of that year, I held a 31% stake in the partnership and was listed as a managing member responsible for contract oversight and risk management. My signature was required for amendments that affected liability exposure. It was not glamorous work. It was spreadsheets and late-night calls about occupancy limits and fire code compliance. At home one evening in 2022, my daughter sat at the kitchen counter doing homework while I reviewed a draft event contract. "Why don't they ever talk to you about business?" she asked suddenly. "Who?" "Grandpa, Aunt Allison. They always talk to each other about deals and projects. Not you." I did not look up right away. I underlined a clause regarding indemnity. "Because they assume they know who I am," I said finally. "And who are you?" she asked. I closed the folder and met her eyes. "I am someone who reads the fine print." She smiled faintly. "That sounds powerful." "It is, just not in a loud way." In 2023, I led a multi-state compliance audit for a healthcare client that had been flagged for regulatory inconsistencies. The case required coordination across 3 states and months of meticulous review. When we closed the matter without penalties and secured a renewed contract valued at several $1,000,000, the senior partner called me into his office. "You saved us a client," he said. "I did my job." He leaned back in his chair. "You're more than a supporting player here, Claire." Supporting player. The phrase echoed in my mind long after I left his office. At family gatherings, nothing had changed. My sister still referenced development projects in Asheville and Charleston. My father still discussed zoning variances over dessert. Once during Thanksgiving in 2023, my father asked casually, "Still busy with paperwork?" I took a sip of wine. "Always," I said. He nodded, satisfied, and turned back to my sister. He did not know that the ballroom where his foundation planned to host its annual benefit the following spring belonged in part to the partnership I helped manage. He did not know that the event planner who signed the initial contract had sent it to my inbox for review because I was the designated managing member for that property. He did not know because I did not volunteer it, and because he never asked. When the Davenport Foundation coordinator reached out in late 2023 to secure the Riverfront Exchange for April 2024, the contract came through Harbor Ridge Capital like any other booking. I reviewed the headcount limits, the insurance requirements, the amendment clauses. I signed. Allison coordinated through an event planner. She likely assumed the property was owned by a faceless investment group. In a way, it was. She never imagined my name was on the operating agreement. At home one night in early 2024, as we cleared dinner plates, my daughter asked, "Are you excited about the gala?" "It will be an evening," I said. She studied me. "Do you ever wish they saw you differently?" I paused. "I don't need them to see me differently," I said carefully. "I need to know who I am, whether they look or not." She nodded slowly. In the months leading up to the event, I did not mention my role at the Riverfront Exchange to anyone in my family. Not because I wanted a surprise, not because I was planning a confrontation. I simply understood that my position did not require validation. I no longer needed a seat offered to me. I had secured my own ground. And as I stood in that ballroom watching my daughter prepare to step aside for the overflow area, I knew exactly which documents were sitting in the property office upstairs and exactly whose signature would determine whether the night proceeded smoothly. I did not need them to see me. I only needed to be certain that I was standing on something solid. Chapter 4. The ballroom was already too full by the time the second round of champagne began circulating. The Savannah Arts Alliance Spring Gala had drawn more attention than expected. 250 confirmed guests had turned into something closer to 280. The local paper had sent a photographer. A city council member stood near the stage speaking animatedly with a donor from Atlanta. My father, Thomas Whitaker, moved from table to table with the ease of a man who had spent decades believing he owned every room he entered. My sister Allison laughed too loudly at something a board member said. Her hand rested lightly on the back of a chair, as if she were anchoring herself to the center of the evening. Beside me, my daughter Maya stood quietly, her hands folded in front of her. She had not gone upstairs to the overflow reception. She stayed because I asked her to. A man in a charcoal suit approached the head table and leaned down to whisper something to Gregory Cole, one of the Alliance board members. Gregory's smile faltered. He straightened and tapped his glass lightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, a quick housekeeping note," he said. "We may need a brief pause before dinner service. There is a minor contractual detail we are clarifying." A ripple of polite confusion moved through the room. Across the ballroom I saw him, Daniel Harper, property manager for the Riverfront Exchange, scanning the crowd until his eyes found mine. He did not look panicked. He looked professional. He crossed the floor and stopped a respectful distance from my father and sister, who were mid-conversation with a donor couple. "Mr. Whitaker," Daniel said evenly. "Ms. Whitaker, we have an issue regarding headcount." My father frowned. "What kind of issue?" "The final attendance exceeds the contracted capacity by 35 guests. The insurance rider on file covers 250. Allison's posture stiffened. "We confirmed the numbers last week," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Daniel replied. "However, additional guests were added after the certificate was issued. We need an amended liability clause and updated insurance coverage before proceeding with full service." My father's jaw tightened. "Then amend it," he said. "We can settle the paperwork tomorrow." Daniel glanced briefly at me before answering. "The operating agreement requires managing member approval for liability amendments. The managing member must sign in person." My father followed Daniel's gaze and saw me standing beside Maya. There was a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "What does she have to do with this?" he asked. Daniel did not raise his voice. "Ms. Carter is a managing member of Harbor Ridge Capital, which holds a controlling interest in this property. Her signature is required to authorize the amendment." The space between us filled with silence. I could feel nearby conversations slowing, people sensing that something unscripted was unfolding. My sister stepped closer, her expression carefully neutral. "Claire," she said quietly, "since when are you involved with this property?" "Since 2021, I replied. My father stared at me as if I had just spoken in another language. "That's not possible," he said. "We would have known." I held his gaze. "You would have known if you had asked?" The donor couple shifted awkwardly. The councilman pretended to examine his phone. Gregory cleared his throat. "What happens if we do not amend tonight?" he asked Daniel. Daniel answered with the same steady tone he had used in every meeting we had ever attended together. "If the rider is not updated, the venue cannot legally host the additional guests. Fire code compliance and insurance liability would require us to suspend service." Suspend service. In a room full of major donors and press. My sister lowered her voice. "You're not actually considering holding this hostage," she said. "I am considering whether the contract we signed will be honored," I replied. Maya's fingers brushed mine lightly. I did not look down. My father stepped closer until he was standing directly in front of me. "This is a family event," he said. "Whatever business arrangement you have, this is not the time." "It is exactly the time," I said calmly. "Because business is what brought us here." He searched my face for a crack for a sign that I was bluffing. "Why was I not informed?" he demanded. "Because I am not on your payroll," I said, "and because you never asked what I was building." Daniel extended a leather folder toward me. "The amendment reflects the updated headcount and requires the managing member signature for liability coverage adjustment." I took the folder and opened it. The language was precise. "Updated certificate of insurance required within 24 hours. Temporary rider contingent on signature." My sister exhaled sharply. "This is embarrassing," she whispered. "It does not have to be," I said. I looked at Daniel. "If I sign the event proceeds without interruption?" "Yes." "And if I do not?" "We suspend service until compliance is met." Around us, a few guests had begun to notice the tension. A photographer adjusted his camera, but did not lift it. My father spoke through clenched teeth. "Claire, be reasonable." Reasonable. I thought of my daughter standing at the registration table earlier, being directed toward an overflow room. I closed the folder gently. "I have one condition," I said. My sister's eyes flashed. "You cannot negotiate terms at our own gala." "I am not negotiating the gala," I said. "I am clarifying a boundary." I turned slightly so that Daniel and Gregory could hear. "My daughter will be issued full access credentials for this event as a member of the hosting family, not as overflow, not as an afterthought." Gregory blinked. "That can be arranged." My sister opened her mouth to object, then stopped. The calculation was visible. 35 excess guests, insurance compliance, press in the room. My father's shoulders sagged just slightly. "Fine," he said. Daniel nodded. "I will have a staff member issue the credential immediately." He handed me a pen. For a brief moment, I let the weight of it settle in my hand. I signed. Daniel closed the folder. "Thank you, Ms. Carter. We will proceed." He stepped away to relay instructions to catering. Conversations slowly resumed. The councilman laughed a little too loudly at something the donor said. The band began a soft instrumental piece to fill the space. My sister leaned in close to me. "You blindsided us," she said. I met her eyes. "I did not hide," I said quietly. "You just never looked." She stepped back as a staff member approached Maya with a new badge and wristband. "Here you go," the young woman said, smiling warmly. "Full access." Maya took it carefully, as if it might disappear. My father remained still for a moment, then adjusted his jacket and turned back toward the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with renewed confidence, "thank you for your patience. Let's continue." Applause followed, polite and relieved. I watched as Maya slipped the wristband onto her arm. She looked up at me, searching my face for reassurance. "We're staying," I said. She nodded. We walked past the rope that separated the main ballroom from the overflow area. No one stopped us. No one redirected us upstairs. For the first time at one of these events, we did not stand near the exit or hover at the edge of a conversation. We moved through the center of the room. A donor I recognized from previous years extended his hand. "Ms. Carter, I did not realize you were involved with the exchange," he said. "I am," I replied. He smiled. "Impressive." Across the room, my sister was already speaking animatedly to another guest working to regain momentum. My father delivered his speech about community impact without a single reference to what had just occurred. But the dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the daughter attending out of obligation. I was not the single mother quietly grateful for an invitation. I was the managing member whose signature had allowed the night to continue. As dinner was served, Maya leaned closer to me. "Mom," she whispered, "you didn't yell." I didn't need to. She studied the room, then looked back at me. "I like this version of you." I smiled softly. This version was always here. The chandeliers cast warm light over the tables. Laughter rose again, less strained now. The photographer resumed capturing smiling faces. At the center of the ballroom, under the same lights that had once made me feel peripheral, I stood beside my daughter not as an afterthought but as a decision-maker. And for once, we were not standing at the edge of anything. Chapter 5. The music carried on as if nothing had happened, but something fundamental had shifted. By the time dessert was served, most guests had either heard a version of the story or sensed that there had been a correction behind the scenes. In rooms like this, power rearranges itself quietly. People notice who speaks and who signs. My father waited until the final speech ended before approaching me. He did not do it in the center of the ballroom. He gestured toward a side hallway near the coat check, away from donors and cameras. "Claire," he said, his voice low, "we need to discuss this privately." I nodded and followed him, aware of my sister Allison trailing a few steps behind. The hallway was quieter, lined with framed photographs of the building's renovation years earlier. My father turned to face me. "Since when do you hold ownership here?" "Since 3 years ago." Why was I not informed? I met his gaze without flinching. "Because you never asked what I was building. You assumed you already knew." Allison crossed her arms. "You blindsided us tonight." "I did not blindside anyone," I said evenly. "You just never looked." Her expression hardened. This was supposed to be about the alliance, about community impact. "It still is," I replied. The event proceeded. The donors stayed. No one lost anything. My father inhaled slowly. "You could have called me beforehand. Would it have changed anything I asked?" He did not answer. The truth hung between us. If I had told him months ago, he would have congratulated me politely and then found a way to reassert control. He would have treated it as a footnote. Tonight, he had to acknowledge it publicly. Allison shook her head. This creates complications. I almost smiled. Complications. I had heard that word before. It creates clarity, I said. That is different. We stood there for another moment, none of us raising our voices. There was no dramatic explosion, just an uncomfortable recalibration. Finally, my father said, "We will talk about this later." Of course, I replied. He straightened his jacket and walked back toward the ballroom. Allison lingered. "You have always taken things personally," she said. I held her gaze. "No, I just stopped pretending they were not personal." She turned away without another word. The rest of the evening passed without incident. I spoke to donors I had never been introduced to before. A woman from a local foundation asked about my work in compliance. When I explained my role at Harbor Ridge Capital and my position as managing member of the Riverfront Exchange, she listened carefully. I did not exaggerate. I did not boast. I simply stated facts. Maya stood beside me through most of it. No one directed her upstairs. No one referred to her as overflow. When we left that night, the river was calm and dark beyond the glass doors. In the car, she sat quietly for several minutes before speaking. "Why didn't you tell them sooner?" I kept my eyes on the road. "Because I did not need them to respect me. I needed you to see that I respect myself." She considered that. "I thought you were just letting them decide everything," she admitted. "I was letting them decide what they could control," I said. "That does not mean they controlled me." She leaned her head back against the seat. "I did not know you owned part of this place. You did not need to know until it mattered." A small smile tugged at her mouth. "It mattered. Yes, it did." In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects were subtle but real. A major donor called my father to ask about the ownership structure of the venue. Not accusatory, just curious. Is there a conflict of interest we should be aware of? My father assured him there was not, but the question itself lingered. Allison had been in discussions with a nonprofit in Charleston about redesigning their headquarters. The board hesitated once they realized the Riverfront Exchange was partially owned by a member of her immediate family who had not been disclosed during contract talks. "We prefer to avoid any perception issues," one board member reportedly said. The project went to another firm. Allison never accused me directly, but she did not have to. The loss spoke loudly enough. There was no revenge campaign. I did not leak information. I did not undermine anyone's work. I simply allowed the truth to exist in the open. At Sunday dinner 2 weeks later, the atmosphere was different. My father asked almost casually, "How is the exchange performing this quarter?" "Well," I said, "revenue is up 12% since we tightened booking policies. We are considering upgrades to the sound system." He nodded. Good. It was the first time he had asked a direct question about something I built. Allison avoided my eyes for most of the meal. When she finally spoke, it was not confrontational. "Are you planning to expand the partnership?" she asked. "Possibly. Into Charleston." I held her gaze. "Possibly?" There was no hostility in my voice, just information. After dinner, as we stood near the front door, I made something clear. "I will attend events when my daughter is treated as a member of this family," I said. "Not an add-on, not an afterthought." My mother shifted uncomfortably. "Of course she is family," she said. "Then it should not be difficult." No one argued. That was the change. Back at home, Maya sat at the kitchen counter scrolling through photos from the gala. "There we are," she said, turning the screen toward me. "Not in the corner." "Not in the corner," I agreed. She looked up at me. "Do you think Grandpa is mad?" "Probably. Does that bother you?" I thought about it honestly. It used to. And now I am more interested in whether you are proud. She smiled in a way that felt different from the polite acceptance I had seen for years. "I am." That was enough. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel vindicated. I felt steady. There was no dramatic fallout, no fractured family portraits, no lawsuits or headlines. Just a quiet shift in narrative. I was no longer the daughter who needed to be managed. I was not the single mother grateful for inclusion. I was a partner, a lawyer, a property owner, a mother who decided that shrinking was no longer an option. And if you have ever been the person they stopped asking about the one copied quietly on the email instead of addressed directly, ask yourself something. Were you silent because you were afraid? Or were you preparing for the moment when your signature would matter?